Hi there and welcome to another exciting session of training provided by Quicksoft. In today's chapter, we're going to cover invoicing with rules. This topic may be not familiar to many people, so we want to make sure you understand this topic completely. We will explain to you what is the business purpose and why there is a need to have invoicing with rules. And once you understand what is the business purpose, I'll explain to you what are the different types of rules which are available in the system and how to use those. Okay, so let's start. So in invoicing with rules, it's very important to understand that what is the business purpose, what is the business need for which we need this invoicing with rules. Those who understand receivable very well, typically when you create an invoice, what is the accounting entry you have? Debit receivable and credit revenue. It's as simple transaction as this. Yeah, but I will share with you the business scenario now so that you understand, yes, there is a need that we don't want to record receivable or revenue at the same time when you create invoice. Yeah, so this could be very new to some of you guys, but once you go through this chapter you will get clarity of why this is available. Let me walk you through two scenarios so that you get clarity. Let's say scenario one. Scenario one is for annual maintenance. Yeah, you charge for the maintenance at the beginning of the year. Let's say typical like software maintenance, right? So every year we have to pay software maintenance fees to the vendor. Yeah, so if you are the vendor, you're charging this software maintenance fees to your customer. Yeah, so what happens at the beginning of the year, you send the invoice to a customer for the full year service which you're going to provide them. Let's say you charge them $12,000, so that you send them invoice in the beginning of the year. Customer makes a payment of the invoice, and then you provide services to a customer for the whole year. This is a very simple example. In every business scenario, you will have this example. So now, what is the transaction? When I create invoice in the month of Jan, transaction will be, I will say debit receivable and credit revenue, right? Receivable will be settled when the money comes, but revenue will be shown as a revenue in the month of Jan. Now what will happen? The whole revenue will be shown as a month of Jan, but if you look at from the process perspective, even though I'm raising invoice in the month of Jan, but what I'm committing that I will give you services to the customer for the whole year. That means my resources, my employees will be providing services to the customer for the whole year, and I'll be having expenditure each month depending upon whatever resources are occupied to provide the service. Yeah, so if I show expenses throughout the year but show revenue only in the month of Jan, then it will not reflect accurately in your P&L. Yeah, so in this scenario, ideally what should happen? We should be able to recognize revenue each month also. I can, from the process perspective, yes, I will bill it in the month of Jan, which is correct. Customer will make the payment, which is correct. The only difference is I will not recognize revenue 100% in a month in which I am generating this particular invoice. I want to spread my revenue across the year period of service which I'm giving to them. Okay, so this is one scenario which is very common. Almost every implementation we have this. Now scenario two, which is not that frequent, but it can happen. So it's important to understand that as well. Now scenario one was where I was billing in advance, but I was recognizing revenue over the period. The scenario two is where you provide services to customer on a monthly basis, and as per my contract with the customer, I should bill only quarterly. Yeah, so now this is the different requirement. Now you should recognize revenue every month so that it reflects correctly on your P&L. Also, you should recognize unbilled amounts so that your balance sheet is accurately reflected as well. Now what's the difference here? Key thing is I'm providing services every month. Yeah, so every month my resources are going and working on customer side doing the work, but they're saying bill me only quarterly. So I'm recognizing revenue every month, and I'm also putting unbilled receivable amount. Yeah, this is the new account which is created, which is very similar like receivable, but we have different category called unbilled receivable. This is your asset account as well, but we just want to differentiate how much is unbilled receivable. So when at the end of the quarter, when I bill to the customer, that is the time this unbilled is reduced and actual receivable is booked. You will see this very shortly in the next slides in an example, then you will understand very clearly. What I wanted to do was I wanted to explain to you why there is a need to have invoicing with rules. Imagine if you don't have invoicing with rules process, then your accountants would have to do the same thing manually in GL. Yeah, many organizations have seen without this facility, they were doing all this in Excel, maintaining schedules outside the system in Excel, and every month posting necessary entries to reflect the same. So with the invoicing with rules, you have the power in your hand. You just define the invoice accurately, and system will take care of all this for you. Now let me give you some more insights about this process for how it works. So this basically have two things. When you want to have invoicing with rules, it basically contains two rules inside, in accounting rule and invoicing rule. So accounting rule basically determines the accounting period or periods, because you can have, like the example I gave earlier, I can have 12 months of support schedule. Yeah, so it will decide the revenue distribution for an invoice line. Yeah, so for when you create an invoice for that line, what is the revenue distribution based on the rules, it will be determined. Yeah, accounting rules determine revenue recognition schedule. Yeah, when we say revenue recognition, as I gave an example earlier, depending upon the number of period we give, accounting rule tells the system that recognize revenue in how many months. Like in my example earlier, if it is a 1 year service, I will define an accounting rule for 12 months. So it will recognize revenue, spread that revenue over a period of 12 months and recognize in each individual month, so the revenue is reflected accurately in your P&L. Yeah, there can be two kinds of accounting rule. Fixed duration, we can define in the scheduling rule master, which I'm going to show you shortly. We can define the rules, fixed rule 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So when you choose from the list of value at the invoice line level, it will automatically calculate just your start and your end date for your schedule. Other option could be, which is also a popular option, is a variable duration. Variable duration means at the invoice level, I decide how many months it's going to be. Yeah, so if your process is very standard, then you can define it all in the system, then end user will just choose it from the list of value, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever period you need. But if it is dynamic, every invoice you may need 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 11 months, 13 months. So you don't have to define all that in the system. You can just define a rule called variable duration. When you define variable duration rules, then the user will be able to enter the number of months as per their need at invoice level itself. As I mentioned here, fixed duration is predefined. Variable duration you enter during invoice entry. So this gives you more flexibility. So this is accounting rule. Other one is invoicing rules. So difference between accounting rules is basically controlling the revenue distribution, and invoicing rule determines the accounting period in which receivable amount is to be recorded. So this basically come into picture primarily for arrears. Invoicing, second example which I gave you. So use invoicing rules to determine when to recognize your receivable for invoices that span more than one accounting period. Yeah, invoicing with rules is we're always talking about over a period, right? So you can assign only one invoicing rule to one invoice. Yeah, because now this is important. Accounting rules can be at invoice line level. Like for each line, I can have their separate accounting rule, but invoicing rules is at invoice level. It can be only one. So invoice rule is bills in advance or bills in arrears. So because if you later you will see when we see receivable transaction screen, you choose invoicing rules at the invoice header level. So I can have only one. And you choose accounting rules at the invoice line level. So I can give for each line separate accounting rules. That's why this can be multiple in one invoice. This can be only one because this is defined at invoice header level. Invoicing rules can be of two types, in advance or in arrears. The scenario which I showed, example which I showed in the previous slide, the scenario 1 was bills in advance. Scenario 2 is for bills in arrears, where I'm recognizing receivable later. I'm recognizing revenue first, receivable later. Here in the bills in advance, which was scenario 1, I'm recognizing receivable first, but recognize revenue over the period. Yeah, I just want to give you a glimpse of that again. You see scenario 1. Scenario 1, I am recognizing revenue over the period. Yeah. In scenario 2, I'm recognizing receivable later. Yeah. So this is what the rules will tell whether this will be bills in advance, this will be bills in arrears. Okay. This will become even more clearer when you're going to see the next slide. Yeah. Just want to give you a bit of theory because this is very important for you to understand what this is and why should you use this, because if you don't understand why, it's very difficult when you at the customer side you want to implement something. You should understand customer requirement. Yeah. So bills in advance, use this rule to recognize your receivable immediately. When I create invoice, I recognize receivable immediately in my scenario 1. Bills in area, use this rule if you want to record the receivable at the end of the revenue recognition schedule. Like in the example I gave you, if I am creating a 3-month quarterly billing, so my schedule is finishing in the quarter after 3 months, and then I will recognize receivable after 3 months. So you have to assign the rule accordingly in the invoice header level and then accounting rule at the invoice line level. Okay, so now let me show you the example so that you get clarity about how it works. In this slide, I want to show you a comparison about bills in advance and bills in arrears so that you get clarity how this process works. Yeah, so I have explained you already what this process is, but with this picture it will become even more clearer to you. So now what is bills in advance? Let's say take a simple example. I'm creating an invoice for $3,000. Invoicing rules, I'm choosing bills in advance. Invoicing rules is chosen at invoice header level. I chose bills in advance. Yeah, and then accounting rule, bills in advance means I will recognize receivable immediately. Yeah, accounting rule I want, which is 3-month fixed duration. That means I want to recognize the revenue over the period of 3 months. Yeah, so this is the two rules which come into action. This is defined at invoice header level. This is defined at invoice line level. Now what happens? This is for 3 months, means Jan, Feb and March. So what is the accounting entry when you create invoice which happens? When you create invoice, the entry will be debit receivable, because in bills invoicing rules, bills in advance, I will recognize the receivables immediately and I will credit unearned revenue. Yeah, unearned revenue is very similar to revenue account, but is separate classification which is called unearned. That means I have not earned it yet. Yeah, as I mentioned in my scenario 1, we are billing them for the whole period, so I have not earned that revenue. Yeah, what is the meaning of earned? Earned means I should have given services, then I charge them. That means I earned that revenue. In this example, I've not given them services for 3 months. Yeah, so I'm just creating this invoice in advance. So that's why I'm saying it's unearned. When you create invoice, it will create these two lines: debit receivable, credit. So this is the accounting at a time of invoice, and then you have to run a process called recognize revenue. This is the process available in receivable. Once you run that, because this is run at monthly basis, so it will recognize revenue for the month of Jan. So what happens if you look at the next two lines, it is reducing unearned revenue, which was credit before, debit by 1000 and then credit revenue. So in the end, by the time this entry finishes, you'll have debit receivable 3000 and then your credit unearned becomes 2000 because this will be adjusted, and credit revenue 1000. So I would have recognized revenue for 1 month in this one and receivable full one, and then next month I run the revenue recognition program again. It will again reduce unearned and put into revenue. Yeah, so by the time 3 months finishes, my unearned revenue should be 0 and I should have recognized revenue fully for 3 months. So in this example, we are recognizing revenue over the period of the services given. Yeah, now let's look at, this is bills in advance. Yeah, so bills in advance. Let's look at bills in arrears, where I'm going to bill later. Now bills in arrears, so invoice, same example, invoice is 3000, but my invoicing rules in bills in arrears, previous example was bills in advance. Accounting rule is still same. Yeah, so I have Jan, Feb, March. So when I create invoice, my entries are debit unbilled receivables, credit revenue. I'm recognizing revenue for this month, whatever services are given. Of course, you should recognize revenue for to the extent of services given. I've given services for 1 month. I'm recognizing revenue for my month in my books, but I'm not sending invoice to the customer yet. Yeah, I'll just create invoice in my system. Yeah, and then unbilled receivable does not mean you don't create invoice. All this activity is happening inside invoice. So you create invoice, but you don't send it to them. So you create invoice with the rules, bills in arrears, it will debit unbilled receivables and credit revenue. Yeah, so unbilled receivable also is asset in nature. Yeah, so it's very similar to receivable but separate account code, so we can track how much is unbilled. Yeah, and credit revenue. Next month I again do unbilled receivable, credit revenue. In the last month, which is the end of my revenue scheduling period, which is 3 months, it will say debit unbilled receivable 1000 and credit revenue 1000, which is standard entry. So these three entry are same, and then it will post final entry. It will reclass from unbilled to receivable. It say debit receivable and credit unbilled receivable. So my unbilled receivable will become 0 and I will have a receivable end of this quarter, and then I can send invoice to the customer. Yeah, so this is a clear example which I wanted to show you so that you understand bills in advance and bills in arrears, when to choose which rule, which invoicing rules, and how does it impact. Hope this would have given you clear understanding of how this rule work. And the important thing is to look at unearned revenue and unbilled receivable. Yeah, these are the terms you have to get familiar with so that you understand how this works. Okay. You can also have a deferred and non-deferred revenue rules. So what is deferred? So when you use a deferred revenue scheduling rule, basically what system will do, it will put all the unearned revenue into single distribution per line. So for each invoice line, you can have a rule, right? Let's say I have only one line, and then the unearned revenue will be booked into single distribution line. Yeah, so that's the main thing which is part of deferred. And then when does it move from deferred to undeferred? That will happen only if you have any contingency which you define, if you understand the contingency accounting. And contingencies are basically business event only when that happens, then you want to recognize revenue, or you want to manually do that reclass of the unearned to earned. That is in the process of deferred. In case of non-deferred, the unearned revenue schedule will be created for each period of your revenue. For example, if I'm doing for 12 months, for each month it will create the unearned revenue line in the period accounting for you. So that's the key difference. Generally, I've seen people use non-deferred, which is more common use. But if you're using invoices with contingencies, yeah, contingency I'm not covering in this chapter because that's a separate discussion altogether. But what you need to understand is, in this example, you create one unearned revenue line. If I have for 12 month schedule, right? In this example, you create 12 unearned revenue lines. That's a key difference here. And then here, to move from unearned to earned, you have to either handle via contingency or manually schedule the revenue. Here it will be done by the revenue recognition schedule. Okay, so with this basic understanding of invoicing with rules, now let me show you how to define these rules in the system. At this stage, we are only covering the master definition. We are not trying to do transaction activity. Later when we do transaction, we're going to cover each and every type of transaction which is done in the system. Okay, so let's go to system and see how to define this. To define the schedule in the system, go to financial, search for revenue scheduling, and then go to manage revenue scheduling rules. Yeah, here you can look at in demo instance. You can also look at some of the examples. Yeah, but I will define a new one and show you. I'm assigning it to common set because I want every BU and organization to have access to this. If you want to make it BU specific, then you assign the set accordingly. Yeah, QS 3 months, weeks of 3 months. I'm just creating it. This is active. Type, it can be daily, fixed, or variable. Daily is rarely used, so I'm just showing example of fixed and variable. I give fixed, I give him 3 months. System will create this schedule automatically. Yeah, so you can look at the schedule. If you want, you can change the percentage as well, but this is the default. If you're okay with this one, click on done and save it. So this is the fixed one. I will create one variable as well. I'll assign it to common set again. QS variable schedule. This is for a CubeSoft company. I'm just going to create variable schedule. Yeah, now in the type, I will choose variable schedule. Yeah, and then There's nothing to mention here. I can click on save and save it. So now I've defined, I can search by starting with QS. I've defined two schedules, one variable schedule where I'll be giving at invoice stage level how many periods and all that, and one for 3 months which I've defined. I can define as many months as required as per my business need. Let us define one deferred schedule as well. So I will define again for common set, then say Quicksoft 3-month deferred. Yeah, so everything else is same, fixed schedule 3 months, but I'm additionally taking now deferred. Click on done to save it. Also remember, sometimes when this screen can sometimes behave a little funny depending upon which browser you're using. Sometimes if you choose variable, if you chosen fixed and you try to change it to variable in the screen level, it may still ask you to enter the number of period, which is not required. So if that happen, cancel and close the screen and come to the screen again. It will be fine. Just want to show you because I faced that issue. Just want to share with you so that you don't struggle with that. After this, click on done and save it. So we have now 3 schedule defined, which we'll be using when we are creating the invoices. In this chapter, you have understood what are invoicing with rules, and importantly, you have understood why do organizations need to have these rules, and what are the business benefits if you do this one. Because if you use invoicing with rules, then you can create a lot of automation for the end user. Otherwise, they have to do a lot of manual work in Excel or directly manual journal, which is not efficient. You have to maintain manual schedules outside. But if you use invoicing with rules, then they will be able to utilize the benefits of the functionality available and create many revenue recognition automatically as per system functionality. Okay, so with this, we come to the end of this chapter. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and happy learning.